Okay, so now it's time to take care of these unapplied migrations right here, and we also want to check out the Django admin panel. So what's going on here and why do we see this message? So when Django first sets up our project for us and when we run that first start project command, we get these boilerplate files, and with that comes this SQLite database. So I'm going to open it up here. We won't actually be able to see any data in here, but at this point, this database is connected inside of settings.py. Django is configured to it. So if we go into settings.py, if you haven't really modified anything too much here around line 80, we should see this right here. So we see that we're pointing to baster db.sqlite3. So Django is connected to this database, but there is nothing in this database for us yet. So that means it's completely empty. There are no tables, and we need to migrate it to actually prep it to make sure that it can get built out for us. Now, the beautiful thing about Django is we don't have to manually build this out. Django already preps a bunch of tables for us, some default things like sessions. There's a user model, so we can actually have a user to start right away. It builds out this table for us and so on. So there's some defaults that come with it, and basically we have to run one command, and that way our database is set up and ready to be customized. So if we go to our URLs, we also have the admin panel. Now this cannot be accessed until we have our database ready. So my server is on if I open up port 8000, and if I try to go to that route, if I try to go to /admin, we're gonna see that no such table exists right here. Django sessions, that's what we're looking for. This is how Django authenticates users, and this table does not exist yet. So what we need to do is we need to run a command and build out these tables. So remember, we haven't had to build out any tables. Django already has a lot of these prepped for us. So it's basically just going to execute those. So I turned off my server. We actually don't need to turn it off, so I can actually just turn it back on. Let's just do run server. And I'm going to open up python manage.py. Forgot to do that. So I'm going to turn on the server, and I'm just going to open up another terminal here. So to actually apply these migrations, we're just going to run python manage.py migrate. So I went over this in the beginning when we first installed Django, and I showed you the make migrations command and migrate. Make migrations, Django has already prepped some for us, so that's why we just run the migrate command. But in the future, we're gonna have to run make migrations and then migrate. So let's go ahead and just execute that. And here we go. So Django already executed a bunch of commands for us, and it told us what it built out in the database, and now we have some tables. So with my server on, if I actually go ahead and turn this back on, so let's turn it off and then clear it and see if we get this error. So now when we run the server, we should not see that message anymore. And if we go to our admin panel, we should be able to actually see what's going on here. And we're going to cover what the admin panel is now. So the admin panel is simply a way to access our database. So SQLite has no interface by default here, so we can't actually see our tables and rows. So what Django gives us here is an admin panel that we can use to access our data, modify it, and so on. So it's a neat little thing that helps you get set up quickly. Long term, I don't like to use it, but it does get us prepped and lets us work with our data. So before we get started, we do need to create a user to log in, and we can actually see the data once we log in here. So let's go ahead and create a user. So from here, now that we have a database, we can run the command python manage.py create super user, and if you hit enter, it's going to by default give you the name that you have in your computer. So mine is going to be Dennis Ivy. I'm going to leave it there. So it says if I leave it blank and I hit enter, that's going to be my username. So Dennis Ivy. So whatever you called yours, or you could just write something in. So you could just do your username and hit enter. Now it's going to look for an email. So I'm just going to do dennis@email.com. And then I need to type in a password and confirm it. So I'm just going to create a password, and I am typing, but I'm not going to see it being typed out. So go ahead and type even if you don't see it, confirm it, and hit enter. There we go. Our username or our user was created. So now we can actually access the admin panel. And by default, there are different user permissions that Django has for us. If we use the super user command, that's going to create a user with a top level permission. So this means that I have admin level access, and that's why I can access the admin panel. So let's go ahead and go to that admin panel and now use that user. So I'm just going to do Dennis Ivy. My password should be auto-filled. I use the same one for these tutorials. Let's go ahead and log in. And here we go. This is our admin panel. Now mine has dark mode on. I'm not exactly sure how it even set it up like this. So don't worry about the colors. Yours will probably be white unless you have some kind of extension. I think that's why it's doing this, but here we go. This is our admin panel. Now the admin panel lets us see all the tables in the database, or the main ones that we're going to be working with. So by default, when we ran migrations, it created this groups table for us and it created these users. So we can see that in our database, when we ran python manage.py create user or create super user, it created this user for us in our database. So I can actually view this user, I can modify some information. So let's actually add in a first name. So we'll just do the first name and last name. I can change the username, the email, and I can actually perform basic CRUD operations from the admin panel. So that means create, update, and delete. So I can actually view this data and modify it. So this is one row inside of the users table. And this is the table that we're gonna need. This is how Django authenticates by default. So let's even add another user. So let's just say John Doe. So John Doe as a username, and we'll just set some kind of password. So we'll just go ahead and type something in. We have to confirm it. And by default, I just need the username, password, and I don't think the email is absolutely necessary when creating. So now we have 2 users in our users table. So that's the admin panel. As we add more tables, we are going to be registering them with the Django admin panel so we can see them and then actually modify this data. So now that we have that set up, we're going to talk about Django models and what they are and how they work, because by default, we have a model called user here. So that's a table, and I'm just going to explain the concept here. So I'm going to pull up another picture here. We'll just minimize these right here. And this picture is going to explain how models work. So in Django, we model our data using classes here. So in our models.py file, inside of our app here, we'll go into our app, which is products at this point, or projects. In models.py, we are going to be creating classes that are going to represent tables. So in this case, inside of this picture, we see a class called project. So in this case, we have an attribute of title, a description, and an ID. Now, when we create a class, all we have to do is inherit from models.model, and that's going to tell Django this is officially a model and it's not just a class. So what's going to happen here? When we actually run our migrations, the ones that we just ran, we're going to have to re-prep migrations and run them. Django is going to take this model and it's going to create a table in our database that's going to look like this model. So in this case, the table is going to be called project. The title right here is going to be a column in that table. ID is going to be a column. Description will be a column. And then we have to specify different value types. So we have to know, is this an integer field? Is this a text field or a char field? And different values like file fields and so on. So we just model our data. And once we migrate, it turns into database tables. And then using these models right here, that's also how we can actually access our data, query the data. And Django makes it pretty simple for us. So let's go ahead and actually create our first model here. So we're actually going to build this out. So let's go ahead and close this picture, and back in our project, we want to go into our app because that's where our models will be inside of each individual app here. So in this case, we are in the projects app. We'll go into models.py and let's start creating our first table. So this is simply going to be a Python class and we're going to call it project. And in here, we just need to inherit from models here. So we're going to go into here, we'll do models.model, and model needs to be a capital M, so make sure you don't forget that. And to create our first table column here, we're just going to create an attribute. So we're just going to call it title here, and we need to specify the value. So we'll just call that models.char field. So this is simply a character field, so it's going to be a text value, and in this case, it's typically a smaller text field. So we'll just say max_length. This is one of the required parameters for any character field. So we're going to set that to 200. I don't see a title that needs to be longer than that right there. So the next one is going to be the description. So we'll just do description. And we'll set this value to models.text field. So text field is typically just going to be a bigger field. It means that we can have more values. And in this case, I'm not going to set a max length to it, but what I do want to set is going to be a value called null. So null is going to be set to true, and this just basically means that we are allowed to create a record or a row in the database of this value, and we don't need to set a description. So at some point, maybe you want to add a new project, you set a title, but you haven't written up your description. you should be able to set it and add it to the database without needing a description. The title field, however, will be required because null by default is set to false. That means that it cannot be empty in the database. Now there is another value here that we're going to add, and that's going to be blank. And blank just means that whenever we're submitting some kind of form or making a post request, we cannot submit this value with this field being blank. So one is for the database and the other one is for Django to know. So in this case, we're going to set blank to true. That means we are allowed to submit a form with this value being empty. So we have our title field, a description, one is a character field, and one is a text field. This is a required field, this one is not. So let's go ahead and continue this. So we also want a demo link. So what if we want to add in some kind of live link, show off the project here? So we'll just say demo link. And this one is simply going to be a character field. So let's just go ahead and use that. We'll paste in a link as a string, and that will do. Now, as far as the length here, some links could be pretty long. So let's go ahead and set that to like 2,000 characters. I just want to make sure that's a high amount there. And we also want to make sure that we are allowed to have this as a blank value. What if you don't have a link? So we want to make sure that you can still submit your form and that you're allowed to have this value empty in the database. Now the next one is going to be the source code. So what if we want to link up like our GitHub link here? So we'll just do source link. And this is also going to be a character field. So we'll just do models.char field. Let's go ahead and set that max length. These can also be pretty long. Let's just leave it at 2,000. It doesn't hurt us there. And we'll set null to true, saying that this field can be blank in the database. Set that to true. And then the blank value, we can submit a form without adding a source code link. So we may not have a link. Let's leave it like that. So we have a couple more attributes here. The next one is going to be the created value. So this one is simply going to be a timestamp of whenever we added a project to the database. So when we add it, we may want to know exactly when this project was added. So let's just do models.date time field. So we're going to learn a lot about these different values as we go. I figured instead of breaking them down one by one, we'll build them out and I'll explain here. So date time field is simply going to give us the date and a timestamp. And we could manually actually add this on each request, but what we're going to do is set this parameter, and it's going to be auto now add, and we're going to set that to true. So what this means is that whenever we create it, just go ahead and generate a timestamp for us whenever this model instance was created. So just take that timestamp. We don't have to worry about that and actually having to create that manually. Now the last field is an ID, and we don't need to actually create an ID. By default, whenever we're inheriting from our models here, Django will create an ID for us, and by default, it's simply going to be an integer value. So that means the first project we create will have the ID of 1. The next one will auto increment to 2, 3, and 4. Now for IDs, this does work, but I think it's a little bit better to use something like a UUID. So we're just going to use that, which is going to be like a 16 character number, or it's going to be a 16 character string of numbers and letters. So this way we're not going to have issues with duplicate IDs because it does have to be unique. So we're just going to override the ID attribute. So in this case, let's just import UUID, and we are going to override it. So we're just going to say models.UUID field. And we also want to set some values here. So the default value here, we're going to go ahead and use that import. So we're going to say UUID.UUID4. So that's just an encoding type right there. And then in here, what we want to do is make sure that this is unique, which means that no other value in the database can have the same number. So we'll set that to true. Yes, it's an ID. This has to be unique. And then we also want to set it as the primary key. So we're telling Django use this as the new primary key or ID. So that means the same thing. So we'll set that to true. And we also want to make sure that no one can edit this in a form. So we're going to say editable, and that has to be false. So we just overrid the ID. So we had to import UUID. We added this value, and that should be it for our model here. So we are going to add more attributes later. We're going to have to connect this to a user. So we'll have to create a parent-child relationship. We'll create an image and tags. But until we get there, we're going to keep our model simple. So now that we created a model, what we have to do here is we have to prep some migrations and then run those migrations. So earlier on, we ran python manage.py migrate. It executed some commands and it created our tables. Now to add this into those tables, or to create a new table in the database, let's go ahead and first prep our migration. So we're going to run python manage.py, make migrations. And this is going to do a few things for us. So we'll just go ahead and explain. So make migrations, and what's going to happen here is if we go to our make migrations folder inside of our app here, we have no migrations. So what it's going to do is it's going to take this model and it's going to prep some SQL commands that are going to get executed whenever we run that migrate command. So let's go ahead and run this. We'll hit enter, and it told us that we created some migrations. A new file was created, 001_initial.py, and this is for creating a model called product. So if we go into migrations, we can actually see this migration being prepped. So Django just created this file for us, and that way we don't have to manually execute all of these commands. So now that we have a new migration, we need to go ahead and actually execute this migration. So let's go ahead and do the next thing. So anytime we add or update a model field or something like that, we run make migrations and then Python manage.py migrate. So make migrations and migrate. We're going to be doing this quite a bit, and I accidentally hit the caps here. So migrate like this. Okay, so that just ran those migrations, and what it did is it took these migrations right here and it executed that and actually added whatever these migrations told it to the database. So we ran those migrations and the table is now officially there. So if we go to the admin panel, in theory, you should be able to see it, right? Because we just added that. Well, we still need to go one step further with this. The table was created, but the admin panel is its own completely separate thing. It's not directly tied to the database. And in order to actually see something here, we need to register a model with the admin panel after creating it. So let's go ahead and check this out. So we'll go ahead and close this out here, and we need to go into our apps, and inside of our apps here, we need to go to admin.py. So the first thing we want to do is import our model, and it's sitting in the same folder here. So we can just do, so there's models.py, we can do from.models, import, and then we'll just do project. So now to actually register this, we need to do admin.site.register, and we just need to add in that model name. So we'll just say project. So we're telling Django, hey, get this model and show it in the admin panel. So now if I refresh this, we can see the projects app and our first model. So from here, we can actually update, modify, and do what we need here to actually add projects to the database. So this is a simple way to do it. So let's go ahead and do something here. We'll just do e-commerce website. We'll add a few things into the database here. So we'll just do e-commerce website like that with an S there. And we're not going to add a description. So let's go ahead and just save it. Let's add another one here. We'll just say portfolio. It's a portfolio website, and I misspelled that. We won't add anything here. And then the last one will be, let's see, we'll just say Mumble. So for those of you that know the Mumble project, so Mumble social network. So that's just a social network that we are working on. So social network. Okay, so we're able to modify data, but look at this right here. This looks kind of weird because we're just seeing the object, but we're not actually seeing a name or anything like that. So because this is a Python class, what we need to do is we need to go into this model, and we just need to add that string method. So we can just go ahead and add in a method, make sure that indentation is correct, so it's part of the class here, and we'll just do __ stir _, and then we'll pass in self. So this is not a Django thing, this is a Python thing. So this is just a class, and then to actually render the string value, what do we want to show for the model instances? So I'm just going to get the title here. So for the string value, we'll just do return and then self.title. So now anytime we access a model and not an attribute, if we just access the model itself, it will be output with the title value. So if I refresh this, now we can see that title value. I can modify this to whatever I want, but now it will output whatever we have in the title. Now the last thing I wanted to cover, you should have already done this, but the reason why we were able to run those migrations was because we registered the app inside of settings.py. So once we registered it and ran those migrations, Django actually knew to look into this models folder and these migrations and find those and then register those. So make sure that settings.py installed apps is configured. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we will add some more models, and we're going to talk about database relationships.